downwards to post-colonial countries. But when you talk about queerness, I feel like it's not understood because the idea of feminism itself is not understood. The idea of feminism is not about women versus men. The idea of feminism is the idea of identities being oppressed because of certain identities being shown as more aspirational, right? And once you think about oppression, there is this beautiful quote that I really resonate with. It says, all oppression is connected, right? If women and genderqueer folks are feeling oppressed by masculinity and the idea of patriarchy, it is generally assumed that men are not. But feminism, and especially intersectional feminism, acknowledges that some men or some people who identify as men, or rather most men, are also facing the oppression of it. It's also anxiety inducing for someone who's assigned male at birth, to always keep aspiring for this form of masculinity that they are told they must possess, simply because of their physical structure or I don't know, whatever else, right? So I think the idea of intersection feminism is in imbibing the idea of oppression being connected. All of us are oppressed or feel oppressed in different ways when certain constructs are accepted as the norm, right? And that's a social level. But obviously there is a few other layers to it. For instance, scientific knowledge is never questioned, right? But science itself encourages you to have the spirit of scientific inquiry. So it kind of goes against, right? So when you're taught science, you're just like, when I was taught biology in 8th standard, I was just like, these are the two kinds of reproductive body parts. But obviously now I know intersex people exist. And a variety of intersex people have very different kinds of reproductive body parts. And that does not make their lived experience or their biological structure any less valid than what, gender conforming, sex conforming people are born with. And yeah, so
this is also not.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I just wanted to add that this idea of that certain body parts, like your genitals, will look like this and you become a man or a woman automatically, also has this hidden thing from medical science about the surgeries performed on children without their consent, because they have, because they don't look like belonging to one particular gender. So that is because that is not spoken about. Yeah.
So that's another. And
sorry, I cut your train of thought.
No. And the next level is obviously when there's science is not questioned, and science is dominated. It's a very dominant knowledge structure, right? There are, communities around science. There is a Nobel Physics Prize, Nobel Biology, Nobel Chemistry Prize, and it just recognizes these ideas, and it does not connect itself to our social existence, right? That's another thing. And a third level is political persecution. Sure, as a man, I do feel anxiety. Let's say I'm a man, I identify as a man, and I was assigned male at birth. And I feel like, yes, I am definitely treated with a lot more respect. I'm given a lot more freedom. I am also not questioned as much. I'm encouraged a lot more, right? These are certain things I might have. But I'm also discouraged from expressing my emotions. Sure, I'm not persecuted by law in the form of then if I choose to be sexually promiscuous, I don't have the repercussion of getting pregnant. And if I do get pregnant, there is no question of whether I can access abortion or not. These are not questions that will come up in my mind when I'm kind of exploring myself sexually with people of different genders, right? So there are certain ways in which I benefit from my identity. I benefit from my something that is completely at the mercy of chance, the fact that I was born with a certain physical structure that others weren't, right? So I'm given a lot of privilege just by virtue of that. And but yes, of course, let's say I am bisexual or I am gay or I don't feel to the need to behave in the same way that is seen as masculine, right? All of these are, of course, issues for me. And therefore, that's what I mean by oppression is connected. The idea of masculinity is as oppressive on the mental health of people who are men or who identify as men and who are cis men, rather, as on any other gender. So, then, of course, there's the idea of Dalit masculinity. And we sat with Kiruba Minswami's talk last week, where she talks about Dalit masculinity and Dalit patriarchy, where at the end of the day, if you're still a man, let's say a Dalit man, you're encouraged to go out, you're encouraged to work. But as a Dalit woman, I don't know what their realities are, but we have a history of preying on the bodies of Dalit women, right? We have a history of culturally appropriating their art forms for the sake of Savarna religious institutions. For instance, Devdasi systems. For instance, who become prostitutes? Savarna women always like to tell themselves within the families, oh, we would never resort to sex work. We don't have to, right? As if that is a lesser work, right? And then who is pushed to working in these forms of prostitution, right? I'm not saying sex work is wrong, but when you're pushed into prostitution, it goes against your consent. There is no consent there. You're forced into that because you must survive, because you don't have access to property. You don't have access to property rights. You don't have access to any other ways of survival. And traditionally, we have created a lot of political and religious institutions. And when I say we, I mean Savarna people, that have kind of preyed on the bodies and the experiences and the art forms of Dalit women. As a Savarna woman, I can recognize that, As a Savarna woman, I can recognize that people in my family probably don't have a legacy of that, because at the end of the day, we are Savarna women. At the end of the day, we have that access to be taken care by the men in our family, right? At the end of the day, even 3 generations ago, my grandmother was educated. She was high school educated. One of them even went to college. So I don't have to, and when you're educated, you don't have to rely on, the marginalized forms of work, marginalized professions, that criminalized professions, because prostitution is still seen as illegal. But then we don't necessarily create opportunities for those who are pushed into these professions to find alternatives. And also we criminalize it and we kind of make it unfavorable, even for those people who might see it as a career option.
Right. This whole shaming and this moralistic shaming of students who take up sex work. Right. So first of all, you're using people who don't take up sex work, and whenever they do something which is outside the norm, which you don't agree with, then you slut shame the person. But but there are people who take up sex work who are students, and then you shame them because that's like horrible thing to do, and you won't question the institution, and you won't question the criminalization, which was colonial. Sex work being criminalized as colonial, right? We're not questioning that. Then you use it as a method to shame people. And yeah.
But even today, when you look at sex tourism, when you look at child trafficking tourism, child prostitution tourism, it's still the post-colonial country. You don't know, most white countries, most predominantly white countries, most European countries, they don't necessarily have this idea of where they are forced into it, where there's a racket around it, right? There is a little more leeway for choice. But when it comes to sex tourism, the idea is you go to a Costa Rica or a Mexico or, even a China or a Japan, because these are all post-colonial countries, and that these are exotic women, right? They're treated like that. Or you go to Thailand and then you call them lady boys, as if they don't deserve an identity of their own besides being called a boy or a lady, So the reduction of these human beings to these tropes is something that has been, obviously, like you said, being passed down to us by a very colonialistic viewpoint. So that's one thing. And so to really recognize that a lot of this oppression, whether it's in the form of racism, whether it's in the form of casteism, whether it's in the form of religious persecution, whether it's in the form of gender, whether it's in the form of class, everything, all of these oppression is connected.
You think we should go to the next part of it?
Yeah.
Half an hour more.
Yeah. Let's.
Yeah, go on.
No, please go. Let's start with some sort of a question and format, so it gives the people who are listening sort of flow.
I'm not prepared for this.
Sorry? I can't.
Okay. So, Tejasvi, select. Now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Tell me.
So I was just saying what we are going to do next, that how you want us to start thinking, and that's why we've just selected simple tools like Google search, and how you're going to talk about the multiple identities in question within multiple experiences rather in question when you search one general thing like say bisexuality or say women in 50s or whatever. So this is a method she's going to use, and probably you can go ahead as questions come along.
Right. So you're talking about the Google images that I shared. Yeah. So, like I said, a lot of these images are kind of passed down to us, right? For instance, when you Google woman, right now, I Googled it right now, and I think maybe it picks up from my location. It shows me Michelle Obama, it shows me a white woman, and it shows me a brown woman as well. What about Japanese women? What about trans women? What about Chinese women? What about Maorian women? What about women who don't look like the kind of women that they have showcased on page 1, right?
Okay. Let's do one thing. Let's share screen and show them actually.
You have it? Is it on your screen?
Yeah, I can do it.
Yeah.
You can also do it. I've changed the thing.
No, it's on my phone, so I'll have to juggle between.
So what do you want me to search? Give me a topic to search.
Yeah, just Google women. Just Google women.
Okay, 1 minute. I will shift screen now.
You can even Google probably ideal women.
First, let's go.
Yeah. If you go back, can you go back? If you go back, you see the definition that it shows? A woman is a female human being. To the right, a woman is a female human being.
Yeah, the word woman is usually reserved for an adult. Girl is usual term for female, child, or adult.
Right. None of which is true, right?
Yeah.
If we really understand cis womanhood, and if we understand that trans womanhood is also womanhood, then okay. So this is page 1, and it's very different from the page 1 that I saw. And what do we see here? We all see women who look a certain way. They seem to be of a certain size. They seem to be of a certain identity that is exclusive of certain other identities. Certain bodies are excluded. What about, for instance, I don't see any fat women here. Are fat women? Oh, I think if you scroll a little, we are starting to see a little more inclusivity. But why is it not on page 1? Right?
Yeah.
And for some reason, we see people who are identified as men. There's Brad Pitt and George Clooney on it.
Yeah.
They have mentioned on the first page, but trans women don't. Fat women don't. Women of exotic, quote unquote, exotic identities don't. Right? Yeah, let's see ideal women. Ideal women body structure apparently exists.
Oh my God, look at this. So they have measured and
yeah. If you just click ideal woman and then space,
body structure,
search bar. Space, hit space.
Done.
No, I wanted to show the ideal woman quotes, ideal woman drawing, ideal woman face, ideal woman body shape, ideal woman knee, ideal woman figure measurements. So clearly, you know, the body structure is a very core part of identifying someone as a woman. How they look, what size, if they have breasts, what size their breasts are, right? The other day, some platform had shared something about how women with big breasts, women with big bosoms, would like to probably donate some of it to people, women with small bosoms. And it was shared as a joke. And I was like, that's body shaming. That's body shaming. That's trans exclusive. That's also kind of not addressing women's health, right? What does it mean to be a woman is kind of defined by certain things like the measurement of your breasts and things like that. So yeah, as you can see, okay, let's look up something like Indian woman. Just write Indian woman. And India is a very diverse country. I hope we all recognize it.
Oh, beautiful blouse, wedding dress, homely clothes. Like these are the categories.
These are the suggestions, yeah. And even here, for instance, I shaved my hair in December, remember? And you don't see any woman with short hair. You don't see a bald head. Because those are not Indian women. Indian women are people wearing saris, looking a certain way.
Yeah.
Wearing jewelry. What about trans women? I don't see any trans women. And even to come across, you know, some of the more oppressed communities of women, we have to search a little bit. I don't think it's right to front. The Indian woman is shown as dressed in opulence, right? When we look for Indian Dalit women, what are the search results?
Yeah.
This is hardly it, right? I don't know. I'm not sure what they're trying to represent when they show Dalit women here. Does it mean Dalit? If you scroll back up, this is quite sad. If you scroll back to the top, most women shown here are shown as being of a certain color, of a certain kind of economic class, most of it, right? I see Christina at the bottom. And yeah, I see different kinds of women, but most of it seems to be showing Dalit women as poor. And that's an idea that we need to kind of wrap our head around.
This is a very interesting article. Just I wanted to point out for people who want to read. Does being an elite Dalit woman mean I'm less of a Dalit? If you want, please read that because it's a good contention for people who say, oh yeah, उनके पास तो BMW है, वो कहाँ Dalit हैं?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So what, I mean, I think we all need to dig deeper as to the identification of a Dalit woman. Does it mean if you're a Dalit woman, you're just dark-skinned and poor?
Yeah.
Or how does a Dalit woman experience life? And what about Dalit trans women? How do they experience casteism? How do they experience patriarchy? And it's clearly very different from the patriarchy experienced by a Savarna cis woman, because when a Savarna cis woman wants to talk about sexual harassment in the workplace, there are Vishaka guidelines. But Dalit women or people who are of a poorer economic class, they have access to informal labor. And Shiny Ahuja's assault on his domestic help was reported 10 years ago, but there was no Me Too movement around it. There was nobody rallying for her rights. And then obviously when we look at Dalit trans women, I think this is interesting though. Imagine we have to look for Indian Dalit trans woman to be able to see these images. These are not the images that are shown to us when we look at Indian woman. These are not the images shown to us when we just Google women. These are not the images shown to us when we Google ideal women. So you realize that how these kind of the idea of Dalitness, the idea of transness plays into their identities. They're not seen as women. They're not seen as women of the same caliber or cadre as, let's say, a Michelle Obama, as, let's say, a white woman. They have these additional identities that they must constantly live with and must constantly kind of assert so as to be able to be seen as a certain way that they would like to be. They would like to just be seen as women, I'm sure. But they have all of these identities that they must constantly carry with them, the burden of these identities.
Yeah. If a child has to Google or find them, it would take 4 or 5 Google searches.
Yeah, and as we don't teach children about transness. We don't teach children about Dalitness. I didn't even know what the term Dalit meant until I was well past college. I'm not kidding. I went to college. I graduated when I was 20, and I still didn't know what it means to be Dalit. Right?
And that we'll never know. Like, unless we are Dalit, we'll never know what it means to be a Dalit. But even the word, I guess.
No, to be able to exist, I need to know what a Dalit means. What do you mean Dalit? Someone says I'm Dalit. I'm like, okay. That does not. I don't know where you locate yourself in history. I don't know where you locate yourself in life, in our community, within the city. So
next,
yeah. And then let's say man. What do we get when you Google man? Just the man. There you go. Men with all facial hair, white men predominantly. I see one black man. I see one brown man.
All are able-bodied. And most of their,
Yeah, their bodies are of a certain way. I don't see fat men.
Yeah.
I don't see Chinese, Russian, or other forms of identities. I see a lot of white men. I barely see men of color. Right? The ratio is very skewed.
Huh?
Ideal man, yeah.
Oh,
Indian
man. Ideal man. Raymond.
Yeah, ideal man. Apparently this is the quality of an ideal man. The second picture is just shocking. The face structure is defined for you as what the ideal man's face structure would look like. And we see a lot of how men would look, how they need to be ripped. Fatness is constantly removed from the idea of ideal being, regardless of the gender. Fatherhood is defined as ideal man. Bodybuilders are seen as ideal men. None of these really show that ideal women are feminists. Ideal women do not assault. Ideal women do not engage in, men do not engage in sexual abuse. The kind of messaging we really desperately need in this world, in today's world. Indian man.
Indian man.
Once again, lots of facial hair. Mustache is predominant. Right? I see a mustache on everyone, except for 1 or 2. I feel like this is the kind of cues that you're given. As a child, if you're Googling Indian man, you're given cues. How to be a man, how to perform your manhood.
Yeah. One thing interesting is, thankfully, it's not filled with celebrities. I had expected Indian man would be filled with Indian celebrities.
Whereas if you remember, Indian women had a lot more aspiration quality.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that you see again the gender bias. And then Indian Dalit man, what does it say? I think once again, when you see Indian Dalit man, what do you see? You see a lot of economic impoverishment. You see a lot of ideas of violence. You see a lot of oppression. That's what you see when you look up for Indian Dalit man. You don't see any pictures of Indian Dalit men just being people, just eating breakfast, just smiling at the camera. That's very rare. You see a lot of markers of violence instead. There's a man in the sewage manhole cleaning it. Whereas you will probably never find if you Google Indian Brahmin man, just Google Indian Brahmin man and let's see the difference. There you go. The stark difference. The Indian Brahmin man is seen as posing, as smiling, as standing with a certain kind of stance and posture. The Indian man is seen as educated. He's photographed. There are photographs of Indian Brahmin men existing from way long ago that we can see for Dalit men. I don't see any markers of violence. I don't see them struggling in their day jobs. That's not necessarily what seems to be the idea of an Indian man. And then if you go, what about Indian trans man?
One.
For some reason, when you Google Indian trans man, one of the images shown is man, Wikipedia. Man. That's interesting. So, but you won't see trans man in, as a search result for just man. So, in that sense, men are still claiming space of trans men here. Yeah. So,
just even the men who are trans and shown are the people who have transitioned. So as if people who are not transitioned are not trans men because they don't look like.
There are trans men who've been shown.
Who are not transitioned? Where? Yeah.
There is Nazaria's,
Right, yeah.
But you have to search for an Indian trans man. These people don't have representation when you just search for man. Why are their identities excluded? And Alok Vaid Menon, who identifies as non-binary, has been shown as Indian trans man, which is completely invisibilizing the non-binary identity itself. So I think a simple Google search really reveals, right, how we process certain visual cues about different identities. So one final search, just Google Indian farmer and let's see if they show the men. Let's see if they show what they show. There you go. Every Indian farmer is apparently a man or someone who looks like a man. Whereas this is not true. If you look at the field photographs from Pari Network, only if you go further down, you see people wearing women, like farmers wearing saris. Go further down. Yeah, here, female Indian farmer. Female Indian farmer is apparently different from being an Indian farmer. And that's it. You don't really see too many people wearing saris and stuff. You see mostly cis mask people who are considered Indian farmers.
Wow.
Yeah. So now they say data never lies, but data, if it's not fully informed, might actually be a lie.
If I type India and gay, it's going to be all Mr. India in the. But then here, see.
It's really sad that it doesn't show gay men or gay people.
And then
in normal situations. Like, why do gay people have to perform? Why do they have to hold the pride flag? Why do they have to be getting married? Why can't they just be going about their lives? Why does gayness have to be performed like this? You see gay weddings. Yeah. If you type straight people, I'm sure it doesn't show you weddings. I'm sure it doesn't show you. I'm sure straight people aren't like, yeah, just type weddings. I'm sure it doesn't show you any kind of same-sex weddings. There are no Indian weddings. I think there's one Indian wedding. What about other cultures? What about Chinese weddings? What about Maori weddings? What about tribal weddings? Apparently, they don't count as weddings to be featured in the first page. There is even a Corona wedding where they're wearing masks, but it's still a white wedding. So these are the kind of ideas that are seeded in our head. What it means to have an ideal wedding. You know, we're told that a white wedding is the perfect kind of wedding. So maybe let's zoom back out.
Where do you want to go?
No, I'm saying,
Okay.
I think we have, yeah,
Regular.
yeah, yeah. So this is just one form of visual cues, right? We consume content and culture and entertainment on the regular in the form of books, in the form of music, in the form of movies, in the form of just culture around us. Everybody, when they show up for a wedding, what are they wearing? Right? They're expected to dress according to their gender. Things like that. We're constantly being given these cues visually, subliminally. So to think about the idea of privilege, to kind of locate ourselves in the hierarchy, in the food chain, so to speak, of social identities is critical to really understand the politics of it all, to really understand where we can leverage privilege and where we need to fight harder for our rights. And there are different ways in which we are affected. Mental health being one, political persecution being another, scientific invisibilization being a third, right? So, yeah, I think that's good enough for a free talk on this. So.
Yeah, and now how do people with privilege? I'm not saying that you have all the answers, but just one or two ways how we can leverage the privilege, or like what now? Okay, I'm aware of my position in the social ladder.
If we are ever fully aware, if we are really aware, then we would be consciously acting on it. Is what I believe. You know, sometimes even I lose my uh, kind of acknowledgement of privilege. Sometimes I'm just like, oh, I can't help you right now because I need to survive myself. But I don't understand, I don't realize how much harder it is for someone else to survive with an Avarna caste identity, like a Bahujan or a trans person or whatever it is, right? How much harder it might be for a person to be queer in as a Bahujan, right? Yes, as a queer person of a Savarna identity, it is still hard for me because queerness is still not widely identified and recognized. And there was political persecution in a few years ago. But what about another level where you don't even have access to the vocabulary to say you're queer, to say that you're gay, to say that you're not straight, simply because you don't speak the language, you don't speak English, right? So that's
not
not
important thing. Like if we look up
the politics, language, and everything. Yeah, yeah. So
there are derogatory words.
I think to locate yourself in privilege is step one. To what to do with privilege is a much larger answer, and I don't think we can reduce it to. We can kind of not reduce it. We cannot club it to the same conversation. But I think we've done a good job of showing people how these kind of identities have to constantly. You have to keep digging deeper. They're not visible. They're not on the surface. A man does not mean a trans man, apparently, according to Google Images page 1. A man does not mean a Indian man. It does not mean a trans man. It does not mean a Dalit man. It does not mean a Dalit trans man. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. It was a good conversation.
Thank you.
I hope people, stayed through it and they got something out of it. I'll put your email ID.
Yeah.
In the description
Or
box.
you can contact me on Instagram. I feel like I'm much more active on replying to DMs on my Instagram than emails.
All right. Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for
Yeah, really a lot of fun.
Bye.